Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Derek Auger, Executive Director of Conservatory Canada, and welcome to the Friday webinar. It's nice to see you all here. I know interest in this was quite high. I see a lot of familiar names. Thanks for joining me again here. And I see some newer names. As you log in, I'll just chat a little bit, and then I'm going to share a couple of files here that are with you today that are key to participating in the webinar over the next hour and 15 minutes or so. And so what's going to happen is we're going to view the mock exam all separately on our own devices on YouTube. I have the mock exam uploaded there. And I'm also going to include a marking form and a marking grid. I'm going to give you a link in a moment. Maybe you can see it in the chat box already. If you can see my links that I've already posted in the chat box, go ahead and click on those. And I'm going to post them again. I believe that once you join, often you can't see them right away. So I'm just going to paste this in again. So there's a Google Doc link there in the chat box now. If you click on that doc, that's a README file. Most of you that have been around on these mock exams before know how this works. You open that document and you'll see a marking grid and a marking form. Print those both off so that you can use them to mark along. And then in a couple of minutes, we'll all start the YouTube link together separately on our own devices. I'll stop the recording so that we can all watch that at the same time. I'm not going to stream the mock exam through my device through Zoom because it's just too inconsistent. The audio quality is not going to be near as good. You can all mark at your own pace over the next 20, 25 minutes, probably 20 minutes, I think it is, or 22 minutes. And then after that time, we'll come back and we'll go through the results bit by bit here on my slideshow. So I'm just checking to see we have a couple more people just joining. If you can't see what's in the chat box, I'm going to paste it again there now. Click on that Google Doc link and you will print off the first two links in that doc so that you can mark along with us. It contains a marking grid, a marking form, and then there's a YouTube link there as well. I'll put the YouTube link in the chat box in a moment once we get going. So the marking grid, I'll just go over this for those who don't know. This is what allows us to mark together or to mark in percentiles so that no matter what the examiner is listening to, they can convert everything into a percentage to get a really accurate idea of exactly where the student needs to be. So if it's a simple mark out of 12 for a piece of music, you go along the top row, the percent row to the number 12, and then slide down vertically until you find the percentile you want. And so for example, if I'm marking out of 12 and I want something worth 81%, I see that it's 9.7 out of 12. If I'm doing something out of 6, like background information, and I feel that they've got 84%, I start at 6 at the very top row. I slide down until I see 84%, and I see that that is 5.0 out of 6. And the examiner adds up all those marks at the end, and we get a really nice refined number to one decimal place. So this marking grid is really helpful to get really accurate on those percentiles so that you know exactly what you're marking out no matter what the number is on the denominator of the mark. The marking form I've included for level 3 or for grade 3 classical piano, that's in the README file as well that you're all going to download and print off. And again, for those of you that have just joined maybe a little bit late, I'm going to copy one more time into the chat box a link. Just click that Google Doc link and you'll be able to download and print off the marking form and the marking grid. And I'll share the YouTube link in a bit, but you'll also see that in the document that you clicked on there so that we can all watch the mock exam together shortly. This is what the mark distribution is for grade 3 from our syllabus. We're going to hear 5 pieces today. Each one is worth 10 marks. 2 of them have to be Baroque or classical in style. That's group 1. 2 of them have to be either romantic or modern in style. That's group 2. And then an own choice piece, which can be absolutely anything. You don't need free approval for that. The teacher can decide if it's at the right level. We're going to see if the student is memorized. They get 2 marks for memorizing each of the 4 group pieces. That's pretty substantial. That's 58 marks for repertoire alone, the balance of which up to 100 is for skills, technique. We're going to hear sight reading. You're going to see how the ear training works for grade 3, which has 4 elements to it. And then background information, you'll see how that works as well with this student who's very well prepared with some great biographical information. Thanks to both the teacher and the student, they remain somewhat anonymous through the process, for providing, this service. They get some feedback. They get to understand where they're at with maybe a week or 2 or more before the exam. This student, I think, somewhat intentionally, slightly underprepared in a few ways. I still thought the student did very well. They get a very good mark at the end. But I would suspect this student's going to score much higher on the actual exam, given the experience that we had together in the mock exam 2 weeks ago now. One bonus mark gets awarded for including a piece by a Canadian composer. You'll see that at the bottom of the marking form. There's a place to add that in there. I'll talk a little bit about critical listening protocol for those that haven't seen this lecture yet. I covered it in the primer, the mock exam primer, about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And so examiners listening in layers, we listen first of all for rhythm and notes, the rhythm especially. Wrong notes will just kind of stick out at us, and the odd wrong note doesn't really phase as much, but it's all about the rhythm. If the student can play steady pulse, same tempo, and they have integrity to that pulse and rhythm, then they're right away into the 80s. Without that foundation layer in place, we don't really, our ear does not proceed to the next level, which is articulation. Is it thought out how the student is speaking the notes, how quickly they're releasing staccato when necessary? Are they forming overlapped phrases between keys with releases to create gestures in the articulation? And then if that's in place, then the critical ear goes on to the next level, which is phrasing, inflection, and dynamics. Are we hearing some kind of expression? Does that make sense within phrases? And if that's in place, then we're listening to style and performance practice, or what I often call dialectical issues. What's the dialect? Does it sound like classical music? Does it sound suitable for Baroque music? Does it sound like Beethoven? There's all these little isms and things. This is really refined knowledge at this point, but that's what students need to get from the high 80s into the 90s. And then overall structure, does it sound like the student has an idea of where they are in the piece? Are they showing off the structure of the music through the transitions from one section to the next? And overall depth of communication, all of this ties into what is the core sound and the tone quality. That's the thing we think of most, and that has to be in place. The students should play with weight at the piano, should make sure that the instrument is resonating in a way that resonates through the whole room, so that everything is communicating really well. Those are some sort of final steps. When listening to voice exams or string exams, brass, woodwinds, we listen to that sound right away. It's so much more difficult to produce than it is on the piano. But examiners are also listening for that at the piano. What's the overall tone quality, and does it communicate? Now, I'm going to stop there. We see we have a bunch more participants here, so I'll explain one more time. For those that have just joined in the last couple minutes during my preamble, in the chat box now, I put a link to a Google Doc. You click on that link in the Google Doc opens, and I'll show you what the Google Doc looks like, so maybe I can better explain for some of you that haven't done this before. Let's gotta get out of here. There's that's called a README file. This is for mock exam May 27. And on the screen, you'll see now what this thing looks like. You're gonna click on this first link to the marking grid, and you're gonna open the marking grid, and that helps you mark them to decimal 1. And then you're gonna click on the marking form, and that's where you can mark along and add your own comments. Concentrate mostly on the marks for now, if you like. Add some comments as you have time, and you can compare with my marks and comments after we've watched the whole exam, which you will find on YouTube here. If you click the YouTube link, it'll take you to the actual exam, and we're all gonna watch that separately at the same time on our own devices. I'm not gonna stream that through Zoom, as it's too hard to hear. We won't hear the nuance the same way. So in a moment here, in about 60 seconds, I'm going to say, let's go to YouTube, click those links, print off what you need, start watching the exam. It's 23 minutes long. I'll also watch it with you, but not with you. And then after 23 minutes, I'll come back, resume my slideshow, and we can get into the actual marking of this exam and see what you think, compare notes. And you can ask me all the questions in the world, and then I'll close with a little talk about where we're going to go with the Friday webinars. This is the last Friday webinar of the year. I want to thank you all for your support, and I'll thank you again later at the end and talk about where I'd like to take this, given your interest in sitting here with me every Friday at noon. It's great. So any questions, throw them in the chat box right now. I'll be monitoring that chat box as we're all watching YouTube. So I know some of you invariably have some issues or something you're not sure of. When you get into YouTube, sometimes it's muted automatically. Just click on mute to make sure you can hear that way. And then those of you that are watching in the future, thanks for joining us as well. You're going to have everything in your inbox, hopefully later today, but for sure tomorrow on Saturday, so that you can go into a folder, click on all these various links, watch everything. I'll have my slideshow posted there this time. but you'll also have a whole replay to the webinar and my dialogue, as well as the link to YouTube, but also the MP4. If you don't want to go through YouTube, you'll have an MP4 there that you can click on and watch the exam that way at your leisure. The critical listening protocol slide. Yeah, that's something I've shared. It's going to be in my slideshow, and you'll get that after the fact as well, so you can actually see that and what it looks like. And I think in the fall, I plan to come back to that now. Once in a while, every once a year, so I do a presentation just on that critical listening protocol. But I think you've seen that before, Katrina. So yeah, you'll have that slide. My slideshow will be in there. So go ahead and start watching that exam if you're all ready, and if not, take a minute to get organized. If anyone has any questions, throw them in the chat box. I'll do my best to answer right away, but enjoy the mock exam. I'll pause the recording now for those of you watching in the future, and you'll just see it come back on. You can resume it whenever you finish watching and continue the webinar that way. Okay, so we'll just give everybody another minute or two here just to finish up, and then we'll rejoin together for a debrief about the marks and how to assess this exam. If you have a calculator handy, feel free to go ahead and add up your marks over the next little bit. And if anyone's joined us late there, I've just put the YouTube link and the link to the mark sheet and the marking grid back in the chat box. And again, in your inbox, for those that joined too late to really get in on that together, we were all watching the mock exam on YouTube separately rather than me trying to stream it, because it degrades the audio quality way too much. And so you'll get a link to all of this stuff in your inbox later today after it gets processed by Zoom. And I'll also mention too, you know, the last, all three mock exams we've done so far, I've been using the Musicology app. Rebecca Featherstone presented that to us back in January, I believe it was. And I've been using it ever since with my students and for the few exams that I administer myself. And I love it because I can hear just a little bit better. I can hear some of the dynamic nuances a little cleaner than Zoom. The ear training is far more efficient. I'm convinced they can hear me, and I can definitely hear them a lot better. In this particular exam for the ear training, I had my mic positioned right on top of my digital piano, which wasn't good because it was picking up the thunking of the keys and the vibration. So I've learned through this exam not to do that. It's interesting when you listen back to it later, the things you pick up. And then just a couple questions before we start that popped up here. Stephanie was asking, in the higher grades, if a student is playing a piece that's more than 2 pages, are they able to photocopy them so they don't need to worry about page turns? They should play from the book. They need to demonstrate that they've got the book there, but they can photocopy a 3rd or 4th page to put on the piano if it's from a Conservatory Canada publication. So legally, we just give blanket permission for that. We don't worry about it so much, but if it's from any other publisher, you have to legally seek permission, written permission from them in order to photocopy a page turn, or in order to photocopy a page for use of a page turn. So on an exam, if a student isn't memorized, they should have 2 copies of the book there to eliminate the page turn if they're not comfortable turning, or if it's a Conservatory Canada publication, they can copy. Otherwise, they need to find another workaround for that. Let's see, there's another question here. Yeah, should the student give a description for every piece in terms of biographical information about the composer? So a lot of students we find in certain areas, certain teachers have students introducing pieces like we just heard, and it's quite common in various centers. I'd say overall, it's not what we usually hear, but we're quite comfortable hearing that. So, hey, what's your next piece? They just launch right into this full description. We just let them talk it out because that's what they've rehearsed. That's what they like to do. And it's great to see pianists introducing their music in that manner, just offering the information without our detailed asked questions. So they don't have to prepare it that way. All they have to do is say the titles, just so we know that we're on the same page. We know that they know the meaning of the title. We know what piece is coming next. And often we'll ask, what key is that in? Do you know anything about that composer? We generally don't ask that for every composer because it takes a lot of time. But of course, we have time in the exam, so we don't mind hearing it if the student, you know, is verbal like that and enjoys sharing. Most piano students aren't able to do that, and so they wait for us to prompt them. And that's probably the safer way to go, unless you do have a verbal student who likes to talk. you know, as this student did. It's really great to see, and we like it either way. But at some point, we will ask the student for biographical information on at least one composer, starting at grade 4. Though this was only a grade 3, so none of that was absolutely necessary. But well, if the student's going to do it, we'll honor that. It's great. Okay, so that answers those questions. I'm going to go back to my slideshow, and we'll talk bit by bit. Throw your questions in the chat box today instead of the Q&A. Just throw them in the chat box as we go, and I'll keep an eye on that. I'm going to share my screen. Go back to the slideshow here, and we'll talk about what we saw and heard. We talked about the critical listening protocol. When it gets to technique, this exam started off with technique, and I gave a mark of 13.3 out of 16. The pulse is steady. Most elements are quite a bit under tempo. I went back and listened later with the metronome. If we're asking for 92, she was at a nice cautious 60 beats per minute. And so that's something that, you know, certainly we do here. The scale's a little quicker than that on a grade 3. There was some hesitation, B minor melodic scale on the left hand. This is incredibly common. It's very rare that we hear someone play a B minor scale, especially with the left hand fluently, for whatever reason. But that's kind of normal, but you know, there is a deduction for that. It was the only element that really had, you know, an obvious problem. All the elements were understood, however, and even the B minor melodic scale, she was able to play and understand what keys to use. There's a thoughtful approach to accuracy with good arm weight. So at some point, we're trying to make a comment about the technique that we're hearing, and in this case, seeing, because she uses her arms fairly well. She's coached very well to do that, I felt. And so the tone that comes out, I didn't comment on tone specifically, but it's something that, you know, when we're in person specifically, would comment on tone. Just needs to develop more velocity to meet the minimum tempos. We love to hear really good workmanship. It's something that one of our examiners used a few years ago when we were putting this syllabus together. We favor the slower tempo with good workmanship and steady pulse rather than someone trying to challenge the tempo with hesitation. So that's explicitly in our syllabus. And so this student's still scoring well in the 80s on technique, even though she wasn't quite meeting the minimum tempos. Just really well thought out. There's a thinking process there that at the beginning of the exam hits the examiner in a way that, okay, this student is able to verbalize what's happening, is able to talk intelligently about the music. It's all well thought out and rehearsed. She's able to think her way through the technique cautiously and carefully, getting everything right. There's a meticulous kind of nature to this student. And we look forward to hearing the music to see how that translates. That's what in my mind as an examiner, that's what I'm thinking of when a student starts with technique. So we heard Klavierstück by Malika Fitzhugh. The student in this case said, used the composer's first name. You know, that's just a memorization thing. She probably meant to say both names or the last name, but it doesn't really matter. Because again, at grade 3, we're not assessing biographical information yet. That starts at grade 4. Okay, a very patient tempo. There's a languid indication. I'd never heard this piece before, so you'll see some of the music I have there. I share it on the screen briefly throughout the mock exam just so we can see what's really happening. I was a bit lost. Okay, what's the time signature? What really is happening? I needed to see the music in this case. It really helped me out. Languidly means sort of tired, and the tempo kind of suited that. It wasn't rushing through things. It was trying to be, again, this thoughtful thing that came to my mind from the student. The tempo speeds up partway through with no indication from the score. There's a way to do that, I think, to make it interesting. It wasn't quite being bound together yet in a way that made sense, but that's okay. It's just an observation. And then a good ritardando near the finish. It felt like maybe, you know, was that speeding up intentional or not? I couldn't tell. And so it doesn't really help the structure of the piece to hold it together, but the student's thinking about something there. So I'm listening further. Good legato sense. I'm listening to articulation. There's a strong feeling of pulse. Hearing too many downbeats. I wasn't really sure where beat 1 was. There was a lot of heaviness in the pulse at times. Hearing some attempts at the softer dynamic. Just needed to differentiate more of that to really be heard as an obvious difference or change. And then overall, I felt, okay, we just need some more fluency with fewer accented pulses to get the feeling of longer lines and to really understand what's happening here. Get the music on a moving conveyor belt. But a lot of the articulation things are in place, and there's a thought process still going on that I thought was good, that I admired. Was she sitting a bit low? Yeah, something I wouldn't comment on generally. That's between the student and the teacher. This particular exam I did know was in the teacher's studio. I don't know if she was sitting too low. I mean, I like to see the elbows at or just slightly above the key level. to know. But again, over the internet, is that going to affect the tone? I don't know. It might affect the student that's not able to get there. But to me, that's a teaching observation. And so that's something that I might explore in the mini lesson, but not during the assessment. It's a good question, though. Good observation. So what kind of mark does this deserve? I think that it's in the 80s because there's no serious tempo problems or rhythm problems. I feel like the student is starting to understand the music, just needs some refinement to really convince me about exactly what's happening here. I was just a bit confused as to what's happening. I'm not quite sure how that translates musically. It's only the first piece we're hearing. And so I went with 8.3 out of 10, leaving room that I want this student to score higher on the next piece. Be surprised if they were any lower than that. So I think a fair mark for this is anywhere from 8.1 to 8.5 maybe. I'm right in the middle, I think, at 8.3. Feel free to throw your comments in the chat box. What did you hear in that piece? Do you have a question about it? Can you remember what happens? It's hard to do, I know, when you're just assessing so quickly. Second piece we heard was a minuet by Elisabetta de Gambarini, one of the women composers that's often featured in the webinars that we've been having on music by women and BIPOC composers. And this piece, I believe, is published by Eleanor Gummer in her series. See them in the chat box. Okay. The minuet. Tempo pulse is mostly steady, just a couple of hesitations. Articulation is well thought out and very suitable for Baroque style, I thought. Just right away, what hits me is, oh wow, this articulation is great. The work on the ornaments is wonderful, very stylistic. Going back and doing the repeats, I believe, on this one, there was extra ornaments added. So we've got some performance practice ideas here. Ornamentation thought out, all that stuff sounding really good. It's a strong sense of accent on each beat. Be nice if the student can feel beats 2 and 3 a bit lighter. And then from there, not always 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Where's the accent to show off the larger phrase, perhaps? That's the next step for this student in terms of phrasing. But they were focused on tempo pulse, which is good, articulation, ornaments. That's the student's focus here. So we're well into the 80s just based on that. Hard to hear any dynamic variety in this one. I just felt like she was hyper-focused on that ornamentation and getting things right and getting things well placed. So could use more shape to the phrases with inflection, but first I would probably address that feeling of accent on each beat. We've heard that in a couple of pieces now, so I'm starting to wonder if there's a way to break out of that. And so we're into the 80s. I'm hesitant to go as high as 8.5 or 8.6, but I want to award all that strong work that's happening with the articulation and the ornaments. At this level, we still can't hear everything. It's hard. Some students will come in and give you everything. It's very rare. Those are the students that are scoring 90 to 95 or even 100% on a piece of music. But this one I went 8.4. Could be as high as 8.6 perhaps, but I still want to hear some dynamic variety and less accented pulse on each beat to get beyond 8.4. The third piece from group 2, Billy's Song. This one is interesting. Pulse is steady, a suitable slower tempo. Again, there's this accented feeling on each beat that keeps us from hearing the phrasing in longer lines clearly. Sometimes I use the word longer lines, not so much on a grade 3 report. Good management of resonance with the pedal. You could hear that through the musicology app, which is really good. The pedal was working well to add resonance to the music, to not only just to achieve legato, but to achieve color and to add shape to the piano. The piano without the pedal is a dry kind of sound that isn't as attractive. And in this music, we definitely want it and we're getting it. Lesson to create longer lines. Okay, I did use that word. Phrases by adding longer crescendo, diminuendo, inflection within each phrase. It's time to work on that phrasing, I think, now at this level. And I'm sure the student would address this for the actual exam. Difficult to hear softer sounds through the mic today. It's not that the student was playing really quiet and I couldn't hear the student at all. It's just that we're not hearing the dynamic difference. I don't think it's, by the time we get to the third piece, I'm convinced it's not really a focus for the student yet. Working on pulse, which is well in hand, articulation, which is more legato, well in hand, and getting that beat on track, right? That's the student's focus. So again, that kind of keeps me from getting to that 85 level. And so with this piece at 8.4, I'm kind of stuck at 8.4. I'm hesitant to give out 8.5 until we start hearing more phrasing by getting rid of the accented pulses. And again, we're sure that's coming. This is just a mock exam. We're taking a snapshot of what we're hearing in the moment with the student. A fourth piece, a minuet by Mozart. think I scanned to the music quickly in this one too, that you could see through the screen share on the actual exam. Examiners will do that online. Sometimes, we're watching the music if we need to, but if I have my cursor in a spot in my browser, I can actually still see the student through a small window playing. So I've got two things going on. That's kind of handy to have. Suitable tempo with some small hesitations, nothing that really got in the way of the flow, and nothing that would inhibit the student from scoring 80 when it comes to rhythm. The articulation is tidy, really nice for classical music. That's impressive. So right away, I'm okay, 82, 83. Phrasing detail at the phrase endings has a suitable down-up gesture. That's a simple dialect thing. There could be more of that throughout the piece, but at the critical cadence points every 4-8 bars, there was that nice down-up thing. So now I'm thinking, oh, maybe this is 83, 84. Could develop more fluency by beating or treating beats 2 and 3 lighter, and then fewer accented down beats, again, to get the longer lines. So not hearing the phrasing yet. Some nice inflected shapes and gestures coming through at times. It's just not obvious yet, and not really focusing on dynamics quite yet. So again, I'm kind of stuck at 84 on this piece, although I really admire the student's thought process, right? So 8.4 out of 10 is my mark on this one. We just want to hear more fluency through fewer accented pulses, not being too obsessed about beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 1, beat 2, beat 3. How do we break out of that? And so I'm still leaving room for the student to, to honor that, or find that in their playing at some point, should we hear it today. Own choice piece, do, re, mi. We all know the piece. Now this one, the pulse is fluent and forward moving. We're not getting that accent all the time on every beat. We're hearing some musical inflection and dynamic changes between the sequences, which is really cool. Could exaggerate even more. It's something I had to listen pretty hard for, but I can hear this thought process of the student in the sound. Even over the internet, you can hear the intelligence there. It's just not being exaggerated quite enough yet. Able to differentiate between melody and accompaniment within the right hand, pulling out melody notes louder and lower notes a little quieter within just the right hand. Overall, the left hand could be quieter and more in the background for balance, but a fairly secure, fun performance to me, because now we've got that fluency and it's an own choice piece. I want to get up above 85, and so I give 8.8 out of 10 on this one. It just moves. It sounds musical. It sounds comfortable. I believe in my comments with the student at the end, after I stopped the recording, they identified this piece as their favorite, or the one that they felt more secure in. And so we did a little bit of a quick mini lesson, and I suggested if you can just find that same fluency in the other 4 pieces, I'm pretty confident the student could transfer that. They're going to score much better than the marks I'm giving today for those other pieces. Okay, any questions so far? I don't see anything in the chat, but anyone disagrees, feel free to challenge me on this. In this particular situation, I had the benefit of going back and listening a second time to make sure I'm getting the marks right. In a normal exam, that doesn't happen. We're listening to so many things. That's where I think the critical listening protocol helps. Is the foundation layer there? What's the articulation like? Am I hearing phrasing? Am I hearing dynamics? Yes or no? Be honest with myself. And then style, performance practice. If we're listening like that quickly within each piece, it makes it possible to mark quickly and still keep ourselves on time and mark accurately. Sometimes I catch myself, though. I want to listen to it a second time. I was obsessed with trying to find something in that accented pulse, but did I miss something else the student was doing really well? So when we're listening like that, it's all broad strokes. We don't necessarily need the repertoire in front of us to do that. That's another, for me, it's another distraction. Once in a while, I need to see it just to justify what's going on in my own ear, to make sure I understand and I'm not missing something. But overall, we're not listening to wrong notes. We're not listening for little rhythms that aren't quite right, or just little slips and mistakes for the broad strokes. If we get caught up in too much ideas, we're going to miss something else the student's doing really well. Okay. And in this, and I'm happy the student, I think that these marks are pretty good. They're in the mid 80s so far for the pieces, and we still have the skills to come. And we know they're probably going to ace the background questions. The student's still going to score in the high 80s, given the strength of the other things. The mark for Billy's song, I'm going to go back. Billy's song's 8.4 out of 10. Okay, next, background information. Strong biographical information. At the time, I'd totally forgotten that by grade 3, we shouldn't be hearing all that stuff, but I just went with it anyway and put it in the comments here, so that was fine. Was able to introduce all the pieces unsolicited, which is good. Bottom number in the time signature, 3 4 times, 3 beats in a measure, and 4 means 4 measures long. It's not quite right. That's a common thing. Students don't know what the bottom number means on a time signature more often than not. So that's something to coach your students on. Of course, we know it means that a quarter note gets one beat, or I try to coach students just to say the 3/4 means that there are 3 quarter notes in every measure. Something simple, just rehearse it for now, and as the student gets older, they actually understand what that means. But able to answer all other questions. I put her through maybe a little bit more than we might normally ask in terms of signs and terms and things, and she was able to answer all that, which is great. Memorization, 8 out of 8. Okay, a couple comments. Shauna says, one of the things you appreciate about CC, listening for the broad strokes and allowing the student to interpret the piece as they grow musically. Absolutely. We try not to form any opinions that are really strong, like, oh boy, there's, this and this is in place, but just because this and this aren't in place, well, this is in the 70s. I mean, we don't mark like that. Just play with a steady pulse and tempo and put some thought into the expression a little bit, or you've got some articulation, or you're going to be in the 80s. And that's, that's still important. I know for a lot of students nowadays, they want 90s, but sometimes I coach my students in that way. I say, hey, did you, today this is 87. Do you want a 90? Well, this is how you do it, right? And you sort of let them own how it's going to be, and you coach them to that if they're getting to that level, right? A lot of students nowadays, they just don't have the time to put into it. This student, I think, the student is putting in the time, and who knows how they would do on the actual exam. I suspect they're going to get higher than I would give them today. Marilyn, I think her background info was 6 out of 6. It was astounding for a level 3, in my humble opinion. Yeah, absolutely. Typically what we do is we start at 6 out of 6. And for everything that's wrong, we lose a half mark. Because there was so much there, but a lot of what was there isn't really required on grade 3, but we want to know what the time signature is. Most students score 6 out of 6. We could certainly give them that. And I know you'll see on the very first exam that I did with you, the mock exam for grade 4, the student missed something. I can't remember why, but I still gave him a full mark. In this case, though, that was a pretty blatant one. The bottom number of the time signature. So I was okay to take a half mark off it. And that's why I would do that. Most examiners would do that. Memory, 8 out of 8, which is good. Now on a real exam, she would only get 6 out of 8. She had a piece of music up there on the exam that she didn't need. It probably wasn't needed for the right piece. But if we see anything on that exam, especially on an internet exam, you're going to lose the 2 marks for the exam. So the final mark, you can almost deduct 2. I left it in there today just to show that we're compassionate and nice. And it's only a mock exam. And she explained to me afterward what the issue was with that piece of music on the exam. And, she's not going to make that mistake after. Sight reading, 2.8 out of 3, not much of a problem with sight reading when it comes to clapping or playing, just very small slips there. When it comes to the internet and looking at the playing and the clapping, you can see on the screen, I've got the music there in front of me so I can see exactly what's happening. And I've got a firm eye on the student as well in case I'm missing something through the internet. Musicology, I've never had a problem not hearing a clap or something, which is really great. On Zoom, I have to get students to, before they answer me back with sight reading or ear training, to play a key for nothing just so they can command the microphone back. And then I'll hear everything they're doing. On musicology, we don't have to worry about it. You can talk over each other. I can talk while the student's playing, they'll hear me, which is really great. Oral tests, clap back, I gave 2 out of 3. There were some problems there. Maybe that's a bit generous, 2 out of 3, but still that's 67%. Chords, she only missed 1.5 out of 2. She got both of the scales. She got all of her chord tones. And for me, the exam total that I'm coming up with today is 87.3. I think a really strong exam and a strong effort. The mark buoy it up a little bit by the strong skills. The playing is also strong. There's no doubt about that. But just to get to that 8.6, 8.7, we need to fix that fluency thing that I'm sure she's going to fix, knowing her and her teacher. It's just, that's where she is in the process at the moment. So type questions in the Q&A or raise your hand to talk live or throw them in the chat box. And we can chat a little bit about this. The marking process, specific things. Yeah, throw in there. Olivia had 86.3. Very good. What else? What other marks did we have today? Yeah, 87.5. Marilyn's right on the ball there. And it's funny because sometimes we come up with that final result and we go out to it a different way. You'll see that when we do mock exam sessions. You do see marks are a little bit scattered in the pieces, but we all arrive at the same spot in the end typically. Would you want to see their leg for the pedal? No, probably not. I mean, it's helpful. I think it's helpful to have an idea of what's going on there, but we're more listening than anything. On the internet, maybe it's helpful. Using internet MIDI software, At some point, I'll have to get a mock exam through Internet Mini so you can see what we're seeing. We can watch how the pedal's being used on the screen. We can watch the keys light up. It's kind of interesting that way. Did you deduct for no Canadian? No, we don't deduct. We just simply add a bonus mark. So there's no -1 for not using a Canadian composer. It's only a bonus +1. So if they had used a Canadian composer, they'd be 88.5. Good question. You know, I myself, I don't go out of my way necessarily to include a Canadian composer. It just kind of always happens that way based on the type of repertoire I use and present to students. But I give my students a lot of choice in the repertoire. I generally don't even share with them that that's an option. But more often than not, they're already using a Canadian composer. But everyone's got their own things, right? I mean, right now, a lot of us are focusing on, hey, women composers, there's all this great new music out there. Let's, you know, and students I find really love it. Marilyn, really impressed with the ornamentation and creativity. Yeah. Too bad there wasn't a place for a bonus mark for this initiative. Well, I mean, it certainly boosts the mark though. You know, once they get the phrasing and the dynamics in place and get rid of the accents on each beat, the ornamentation is going to easily pull them in the 90s. That's where you'll see the bonus mark if you've got other things in place first. The students playing 2 Canadian composers, do they receive 2 bonus marks? No, that would skew the marks a little too far. But a lot of students do have 2 Canadian composers. If they write a piece themselves and they're playing their own composition as an own choice piece, they'll get bonus mark that way because they're Canadian, as long as they have Canadian citizenship. Not that we'd ask to see their passport either. Lisa, I noticed the student whispered her counts on the slight clapping exercise. Is it appropriate to say counting out loud or slight clapping? Yeah, okay. We saw this in the first 2 mock exams we did, the grade 4 classical and the Connecticut Idioms level 5 exam. The student was counting out loud as they were clapping, and in one case as they were playing. We don't deduct any marks. It just, I think it slows them down because now they have something else to think about and execute. It's so hard to verbalize as we're executing. And so we don't pay any attention to that. It's just a matter of what are we hearing in the clapping, what's the rhythm we're hearing in the playing. They can verbalize, tap their foot, whatever they want to do to distract themselves. It doesn't matter. Students have these things that they can use to keep themselves on track depending on how they rehearse, and we don't mind one way or another how they're doing it. Great questions, by the way. These are really good. A little lull in the questions. If anyone has a student that's doing an exam around now and wants to, you know, is able to provide us that student, the family is willing to go through the mock exam process with me. And I'm still looking for more. I do have another grade 3 classical piano exam that I've recorded. I won't be using that until the fall, but I would like to record more exams here over the next month, if possible, to use for next year, because we don't hear too many exams through the fall. There are a lot of still flex exams going on through the fall, but not as many. And I think that's a good time to hear these mock exams in these webinars for us so that we know what's coming up. It gives us a better idea, especially those of you that are new to Conservatory Canada, exactly how the exam looks and what to expect. I'd encourage any of you that are curious about contemporary idioms piano, if you haven't seen the mock exam from 2 weeks ago already, you should go back and check that out. Just email me and I can email you the link. And in terms of this overall webinar format, I mean, this is really great. We've had well over 1,500 teachers participate in these, a number of you multiple times, mind you, within that count. But for us, it's a huge number for us to coordinate with that many of you over these Fridays, probably at least over 24 Fridays here since September. It's got me excited to keep doing this in the fall. We're going to take a little break now, of course, through June, July, August. Teachers are doing other things. You're all busy preparing other things going on. And myself as well in the office. We're going to be busy launching a new database, hopefully in August. And so there's other things that we're going to have to do. But I'm looking at rebranding this in a way. I mentioned to those of you on the webinars the last couple of weeks, I'd like to put this whole thing simulcast onto YouTube so that if you weren't attending live, you didn't always have to register for the webinar. You can just catch them later and I'll post them all on a YouTube channel. And I'm going to look at doing that over the summer so that's ready for the fall. I would also take some of these webinars over the past year, especially the mock exams, and put them on the YouTube channel for you to view or anyone else to view. You can share them with your colleagues, with other teachers, share them with students so they can see how these things go. That's something that I have in the works. And then if you wanted to attend live to ask the questions and be in the interactive Friday noon webinar, noon Eastern, You still register through Zoom. I'll still hold them on Zoom so that we can get the discussion going. I'll still always appreciate the ability for you to attend live and really add something to our webinars this way. But that's just the other addition is the YouTube channel I'm hoping to do for the fall so that we can go on a little further. And will there be in-person exams coming? Yeah, absolutely. We actually do have 2 centers. I'll say this now for maybe the first time. We do have 2 centers in Canada that we are trying in-person exams at for June. These are very small rural locations where a teacher stepped forward and offered to bridge the gap that may be there and assure us that there was a safe venue that was open to having us with very few protocols that we would have to worry about or hoops that we have to jump through the examiner. Also in places where there is a regional examiner available with no travel. Travel presents certain problems right now that we're not ready to walk through yet. There are all sorts of things. So we're just simply trying it out next month in 2 small centers for a couple of days to see how it works. And assuming that it works well, we would like to get back to in-person exams soon. Although what this means is because our students are scattered throughout the year on these flex exams, doing them online, our August session coming up, very few students. It's not worth us traveling or holding an in-person session in August anywhere. And honestly, February has become very small for us because again, students seem to be preferring this flex option around February. That's been coming for years. I can't see that we'll even be able to offer in-person exams in February unless a teacher had a full day at least of exams and they were willing to host them at their studio. And we had a regional examiner that you didn't know very well, at arm's length available. Then we consider doing that in February, but for sure, June 2023, a year from now, we would like just to go back to the in-person format and offer those in the larger centers where the numbers justify that. We can have access to a venue like we used to. Very similar to how we used to, but we're a little concerned about the travel nowadays. I don't know that travel is ever going to return to being as easy as it used to be. Air travel is somewhat unpredictable. It's costly. It's going to be more costlier than ever. So there is going to be some limitation. Those of you in the larger centers will be serviced. Those of you in our rural locations that have a lot of students will still be serviced in person, and that's what we're hoping the plan for 2023. Not related to this mock exam, but now that you have used lots of online systems, which do I prefer, Musicology or Zoom? Yeah, I prefer Musicology myself. I have a couple of examiners testing it out as well. I probably won't go back to Zoom for teaching. I don't mind it. Zoom works okay. Musicology just works better. It's a little bit more pricey, a little bit more costly, but for the fees, I mean, the convenience for the student, they can log in so much more easily. They don't have to pay for the software, just the teacher does. I can't remember what the cost is. Rebecca has told us, and you can get a 30-day free trial anytime to teach online, see how you like it. Our examiners, I think over time, we're probably going to convert over to Musicology a bit more. It just makes the ear training and the sight reading more reliable. I think we can hear the repertoire more reliable, but it's just nothing for me that in a lesson or an exam that beats the natural conversation back and forth, where you don't have to wait till the other person, their sentence is finished before you can claim the mic and start talking. A Musicology is effortless back and forth. And you can check that out in the mock exam again if you didn't catch it. The conversation is natural, and when students have that kind of sense of ease on the other end, it makes the lessons flow that much more easily, let alone an exam. So I highly recommend the Musicology app and paying for it if you can swing it if you're still doing a bunch of online teaching. So thanks for asking. I know there are other platforms out there as well. I haven't tried them. I know other people who have. The big difference is Zoom is optimized for the spoken word audio. Musicology uses a whole different system in the background to get the audio going, and it's optimized for musical sound. It just so happens that for, I would love to use it for one-on-one meetings as well, just because it's more natural. So great question, glad you asked it, and I'm a big fan of Musicology. Okay, any other questions? I know I've kept you for an hour, 8 minutes now. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for your support throughout the whole year. It's been really great to have this to look forward to myself, to plan around weekly. Next year we'll have more guests. I'll put on some sessions about Conservatory Canada syllabi. We're going to try and expand the offering. If anyone has any questions or any suggestions about future topics or guests that we could have, feel free to reach out to me by email and let me know. You all have my email address, I'm sure, by now. I hope you have a great summer. If you're into recitals right now with your students, best of luck. Best of luck with the continued exam preps if you're into that. If you're new to CC and you're just checking us out, feel free to email me if you want a one-on-one session to go over some of the intricacies. We realize that a lot of, to be flexible as we are, there are a lot of options and sometimes they're hard to understand. Those of you interested in CI piano, contemporaneous piano, we have a group that meets about every 3 or 4 Thursdays online just to talk about various aspects of that syllabus. And our next group meets on Thursday, June 9th. So you can look for that link in your inbox as well. I tend to send that out in emails. You will get far fewer emails from me over the next 3 months, but we will keep in touch. It's great to see all of you here. Thanks for your helpful feedback and your comments. And we'll look forward to connecting again soon. And hope you all have a great summer and a great rest if you're getting it. Take care.